The workshop smelled of oil, metal, and sweat, a scent Kalen knew intimately. His hands were perpetually stained with grease, and the rhythmic clanging of tools was a soundtrack to a life of labor. On that particular evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, a faint, desperate sound caught his attention. Soft whimpers carried on the wind. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, eyes scanning the empty streets of the industrial quarter. There, crouched beneath the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, were two small dragons. Their scales were dull, patchy with dirt, and their ribs protruded sharply beneath their fragile frames. Hunger had left their movements weak, their wings limp, and their eyes wide with cautious despair. Kalen had seen dragons before, of course, majestic creatures of legend and whispers, but never so small, so helpless, and so clearly abandoned. Without hesitation, he approached, careful not to make sudden movements. One of the dragons hissed softly, a futile spark escaping its nostrils, while the other's tail twitched nervously. Kalen lowered a satchel filled with scraps of cooked meat and some water from his workshop, setting it down a few feet away. "Easy," he murmured, voice gentle. "No one's going to hurt you." The dragons stared at him, wide-eyed and trembling, unsure whether this human was a threat or an unexpected salvation. Hunger, however, proved stronger than fear. Slowly, cautiously, they crept forward, claws skittering against cracked pavement, and began to eat. Kalen watched silently, knowing that this fragile moment of trust was worth more than any coin he could earn. The first few nights were tense. Kalen returned after work, carrying fresh scraps and water, speaking softly to the dragons as they ate. He never forced them, never tried to touch them until they were ready. Over time, they began to respond. Chirps, small trills, and hesitant nuzzles became a language of trust between human and dragon. In those moments, Kalen realized that survival was about more than food. It was about care, attention, and patience. The dragons were growing slowly stronger, wings flexing, claws firming, and eyes beginning to sparkle with curiosity rather than fear. Yet the world outside the industrial quarter remained dangerous. Rogue hunters, aggressive city guards, and rival beasts lurked nearby. Kalen knew that their sanctuary was fragile, maintained by vigilance, caution, and his own steadfast presence. One night, as he returned from gathering supplies, Kalen found the smaller dragon shivering violently, its breathing labored. Panic gripped him. He lifted the creature gently, cradling it against his chest, while the other dragon huddled close for warmth. He worked through the night, using old rags and improvised poultices to soothe bruised wings, broken scales, and exhaustion. Sweat mixed with oil as he whispered encouragement, and slowly, the smaller dragon's body relaxed, trust solidified in the quiet labor of care. By dawn, both dragons were breathing evenly, tiny flames flickering harmlessly as they tested the morning air. Kalen allowed himself a rare moment of relief. He had saved them from starvation, but more importantly, he had earned their trust. And in that trust lay the beginning of a bond that would shape not only their lives but his own in ways he could not yet imagine. Word of the dragon's presence spread cautiously through the quarter. Some humans whispered of danger, of curses, or of wealth waiting to be plundered, while others watched silently, unsure what to make of a mechanic feeding dragons in the shadows. Kalen ignored gossip. He had learned that trust, both given and earned, was more powerful than rumor or fear. He continued to care for the dragons quietly, repairing minor injuries, providing scraps of food, and speaking in the soft, steady voice that had become a beacon of safety. Over the weeks, their trust deepened. They began following him when he walked to gather supplies, testing their wings lightly, exploring the streets under his watchful eye. Their strength returned, scales glinting faintly in the weak sunlight, and Kalen realized that a life once fragile and abandoned had been saved by simple acts of attention, patience, and care. Years passed, and the two dragons grew larger, stronger, and more confident under Kalen's care. The once fragile hatchlings had become graceful creatures, their scales now shimmering in hues of deep emerald and bronze. Their wings, once limp and trembling, now flexed with controlled strength, and they began to test the skies in short flights above the industrial quarter, always returning to Kalen's side. The bond between human and dragons had deepened into something extraordinary. Each movement, each subtle gesture, was understood, a silent language of trust that no one else could read. Kalen had become more than a caretaker. He was their mentor, their guardian, and in many ways, their family. Life, however, was never without challenges. The industrial quarter grew crowded, with more humans arriving daily, some curious, some greedy, and some dangerous. Rogue hunters still patrolled the outskirts, and occasionally, a merchant or laborer would spot the dragons and raise alarm. Kalen adapted, teaching the dragons to stay hidden when necessary, to recognize danger, and to respond to subtle cues of threat or safety. Their trust in him allowed them to remain calm in situations that would have terrified other creatures. He marveled at their intelligence. They learned quickly, anticipating hazards, and even practicing cooperative maneuvers during short flights that would one day allow them to defend themselves effectively. One evening, as Kalen repaired a set of gears in his workshop, a sudden, low rumble echoed through the quarter. The dragons stiffened, ears flicking, nostrils flaring as they sensed movement beyond the usual city clamor. Kalen looked up, hand instinctively resting on a wrench, as a group of strangers approached. Guards from the Emperor's city, clad in dark armor, faces hidden behind masks. They moved with purpose, and Kalen's heart tightened. He knew these were no ordinary visitors. The Emperor's guard rarely traveled without reason, and rarely to the industrial quarter. The dragons sensed it too, hissing softly, wings twitching in anticipation of potential threat. Kalen raised a hand to calm them, whispering, "Trust me. Nothing happens without a reason we can face together." The guards halted at the edge of the workshop, their leader stepping forward with measured authority. "Kalen of the industrial quarter," he announced, voice carrying a weight that silenced all ambient noise. "The Empress has learned of your guardians." He gestured to the dragons, now sitting silently behind Kalen, eyes bright and alert. "She requests your presence in the palace. These creatures, your charges, are no ordinary dragons. They are of royal lineage, rare and powerful, and the Empress wishes to assess their fate and yours." Kalen's mind raced. Over the past 5 years, he had protected them from hunger, injury, and human ignorance. Now, the world itself had taken notice. These dragons, whom he had raised from starving, abandoned hatchlings, were suddenly of profound importance beyond anything he could have imagined. The dragons, sensing the tension, pressed close to Kalen. Their chirps were soft but insistent, almost as if they understood the gravity of the moment. Kalen placed a hand on each of their heads, whispering reassurance. "We've faced worse than guards before. We'll face this together." The guards remained silent, but the dragon's posture softened slightly, wings folding neatly along their backs rather than flaring in defensive instinct. Kalen realized then that the trust he had cultivated over years of patient care would guide them through whatever awaited at the palace. The journey to the Empress would not be without danger, but for the first time, Kalen felt a strange mix of pride and responsibility. He had saved them once. Now he would navigate the world that recognized their value, ensuring that trust and courage, not fear or greed, would define their path forward. The journey from the industrial quarter to the Empress's palace was unlike anything Kalen had experienced. The dragons, now strong and capable, moved alongside him, wings beating in unison as they lifted briefly above rooftops to scout the path ahead. Kalen marveled at how far they had come. Once starving and fearful, they now navigated the world with confidence, trusting his guidance implicitly. The guards from the Empress's retinue trailed behind, their armor clinking softly, eyes cautious as they observed the dragon's size, speed, and grace. Kalen kept his focus, knowing that any sign of hesitation could unsettle both the dragons and the soldiers tasked with ensuring their safe delivery. As they approached the palace gates, the dragons flared slightly, sensing the immense presence of both the structure and the Empress's elite guards. Kalen slowed, crouching slightly to signal calm, and whispered to them, "We go carefully. Stay with me and trust me." The dragons responded with soft chirps, folding wings and lowering heads, a silent acknowledgement of the strategy they had practiced for years. At the gate, the lead guard stepped forward, massive and imposing, examining each dragon carefully. "These are no ordinary beasts," he remarked, voice echoing off the marble walls. "You claim responsibility for them, human?" Kalen nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I have raised them from starvation, nurtured them, and protected them. Their trust is mine, and I will not betray it." The lead guard studied Kalen, his eyes narrowing in assessment. Then, with a slow nod, he motioned for them to proceed. The dragons moved cautiously, wings flexing in anticipation of any sudden threats, yet they remained close to Kalen. Inside the palace courtyard, they were met with another test, a series of obstacles designed to measure obedience, intelligence, and response to threat. The dragons hesitated at first, but Kalen's calm presence guided them. With subtle gestures and soft verbal cues, he directed them to navigate around obstacles, respond to simulated danger, and demonstrate their agility and awareness. The palace observers watched in astonishment. Not only were the dragons responding accurately, but their coordination with Kalen was flawless, displaying a level of mutual trust rare even among humans and their trained beasts. Finally, the Empress appeared, her presence commanding silence. She was taller than most, cloaked in robes that shimmered like the night sky, eyes sharp and assessing. "Kalen," she said, voice clear and resonant. "These dragons are your responsibility. If you have truly raised them as you claim, let them demonstrate their skill and obedience. If not..." Her gaze softened slightly as it shifted to the dragons, who responded with a mix of curiosity and instinctive wariness. Kalen stepped forward confidently. "Your Majesty, I give you not just obedience, but trust. They follow because they choose to, not out of fear. Everything they are, and everything they will become, is built upon patience, guidance, and care." The dragons moved in tandem with Kalen through a series of challenges, navigating narrow ledges, responding to visual and auditory cues, and demonstrating control over their minor fire bursts in precise patterns. Each action impressed the Empress and her guards, showcasing not only the dragon's strength and intelligence but also the depth of the bond between human and dragons. At the conclusion, the Empress regarded Kalen with a rare smile. "You have done more than raise creatures. You have shaped guardians, allies, and symbols of unity between species. Their trust in you is absolute, and that is worth more than the finest treasure in my palace." The dragons chirped softly, nudging Kalen, their eyes reflecting pride and recognition of the journey they had shared. For Kalen, the moment validated years of effort, sacrifice, and patience. He had not only saved their lives but earned their loyalty, respect, and the acknowledgement of the most powerful ruler in the land. The palace halls were silent except for the echo of Kalen's boots on polished marble. The dragons followed closely, wings folded but alert, their scales catching the light in iridescent flashes of emerald and bronze. Guards lined the corridors, observing with respect and awe. Even the most skeptical soldiers had to acknowledge the power and intelligence of the creatures, as well as the unshakable authority Kalen commanded through the bond he had built over 5 years. The Empress awaited in the grand chamber, seated atop a throne that gleamed with gold and obsidian. Her eyes swept over Kalen and the dragons, assessing not only their physical condition but the subtle interactions between human and creatures. The gestures, the trust, the synchronization. "You have returned them to me," she began, voice calm yet heavy with expectation. "Not as weapons, not as curiosities, but as beings you have nurtured. Why should I trust your word that they will serve with loyalty rather than instinct alone?" Kalen stepped forward, meeting her gaze with unwavering confidence. "Because loyalty is earned, not forced. These dragons trust me because I protected them when no one else would, fed them when they were starving, and guided them without fear or coercion. Their choices are their own, but they have chosen to follow me. That choice is more binding than any chain or command." The dragons chirped softly in unison, nudging Kalen as if affirming his statement. The Empress studied them, then slowly inclined her head. A test was then presented. A series of challenges within the palace grounds designed to demonstrate the dragon's obedience, intelligence, and teamwork. Kalen guided them through the exercises with subtle signals, verbal cues, and small gestures. The dragons moved with precision, navigating obstacles, responding to Kalen's commands, and even performing coordinated minor fire bursts to signal readiness. Every movement showcased the depth of trust and communication he had cultivated. The Empress's guard, who had doubted the practicality of such creatures under human care, now observed in awe, recognizing that Kalen had achieved what many believed impossible: a perfect symbiosis between human and dragon. When the final challenge concluded, the Empress rose from her throne, her presence commanding the room. "Kalen," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber, "you have done more than save creatures. You have created allies and protectors who will serve this realm faithfully, not out of fear, but out of choice. You have proven that a single human, guided by courage and compassion, can earn the trust of beings far greater than themselves." The dragons chirped and nudged Kalen, wings flaring slightly in excitement. Guards bowed, and even the most skeptical nobles nodded in acknowledgement. Kalen felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of 5 years of patient care, risk, and unwavering attention. The Empress's proclamation was more than recognition. It was validation of the bond that had grown stronger with every shared danger and every act of protection. In the days that followed, Kalen's life transformed. The dragons became symbols of unity and guardianship, accompanying him through the palace and beyond, their presence a reminder of trust, courage, and patience. Villagers, merchants, and soldiers alike marveled at the creatures and the human who had earned their loyalty. Kalen continued his work as a mechanic, but his role had expanded. He was a teacher, a protector, and a living example of the extraordinary heights humans could achieve when guided by care, courage, and respect. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind distant hills and the dragons curled around him in the quiet of the palace courtyard, Kalen realized that true strength lay not in gold, power, or weapons, but in the trust one could inspire, the lives one could save, and the bonds one could forge between worlds. The dragons, once starving and abandoned, now soared proudly beside him. Their eyes, full of intelligence and affection, reflected a future shaped by choice and care. And Kalen, who had begun as a humble mechanic with nothing but courage and compassion, had become their guardian, their mentor, and the human who had proven that even the smallest acts of kindness could echo across kingdoms and shape the fate of dragons themselves. Years had passed since Kalen first brought the starving hatchlings to safety. The dragons, once fragile and trembling, were now formidable and majestic, their wings spanning wide enough to cast shadows over entire courtyards. Under Kalen's guidance, they had grown not only in strength but in intelligence and discipline, responding to subtle commands with precision. No longer dependent solely on him, they had taken on roles as protectors of the realm, patrolling the skies, scouting borders, and assisting the Empress's guard during crises. Villagers and palace inhabitants alike came to rely on them, their presence a living testament to the power of trust between human and dragon. Kalen observed them from the palace ramparts one morning, noting how naturally they coordinated with the guard. One dragon, bronze-scaled and agile, soared high above the valley, circling in a broad pattern to watch for intruders. Another, larger and deeper green, patrolled closer to the walls, wings slicing through the wind as it scanned for threats. The smaller hatchling, now fully grown, darted between their ranks, responding instantly to Kalen's subtle gestures. Together, they were a team one built on years of care, patience, and unwavering trust. Kalen felt a surge of pride. The creatures he had saved were now defenders, allies, and extensions of his own will to protect. A sudden flare of movement drew Kalen's attention. Scouts from the Empress's guard had spotted bandits attempting to infiltrate a supply caravan near the edge of the kingdom. Without hesitation, Kalen signaled the dragons. Their wings beat in synchronized power as they lifted into the morning sky, carrying speed and authority that no human cavalry could match. The bandits, initially emboldened, froze as the first dragon descended, a shadow larger than any building sweeping over them. Flames licked the ground near their horses' hooves, not as an attack, but a warning. The smaller dragon swooped low, startling the thieves and forcing them to halt. Coordination between Kalen and the dragons was flawless. He directed them with gestures and whispers, a language forged over years of trust, ensuring that no harm came to innocent bystanders while intimidating the bandits into submission. By the time the humans arrived to reinforce the caravan, the dragons had herded the intruders away from the path. The bandits fled, shouting warnings to others who might consider defying the realm, while Kalen's dragons returned gracefully to the palace courtyard, wings folding neatly, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Guards and villagers watched in awe, and the Empress herself appeared on the balcony above, nodding approvingly. "You have not only raised these dragons," she said, voice resonant across the courtyard. "You have trained protectors capable of defending this kingdom in ways even our finest soldiers cannot. Your courage, patience, and guidance have reshaped the boundaries of what a human and a dragon can achieve together." That evening, Kalen walked among the dragons in the palace garden, now accustomed to their presence as guardians and companions. They chirped and nudged him, testing wings lightly, and even demonstrated a few coordinated maneuvers they had perfected on their patrols. Kalen knew their skills had saved countless lives that day, and yet he also recognized something more. The dragons were not just tools of defense. They were allies who understood the value of choice, trust, and loyalty. Their missions were extensions of the bond he had nurtured, a living proof that a single human's compassion could ripple outward to shape the world around them. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the palace towers, Kalen allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had begun as a humble mechanic, giving food to 2 starving dragons in a quiet alley. Now, those same creatures soared above the kingdom as protectors, symbols of trust and courage, and he was at the center of their legacy. The Empress's guard, once skeptical, now trained alongside them, learning to read subtle signs, to move with care and precision, and to respect the intelligence of these incredible beings. Kalen smiled, realizing that the smallest act of care, feeding 2 abandoned hatchlings, had grown into a network of protection that spanned the kingdom. And as the dragons perched nearby, wings folding gently, eyes glowing softly in the twilight, he knew that their missions had only just begun.